a first step in a years-long process of clinical trials. And so Xthera, they took things offshore. You see, Preston had a business partner by the name of Alan Quasha, who was interested in becoming Xthera's partner in the Caribbean. And the Times even reporting that Quasha was so impressed with the data from the Croatian study that he invested $3 million and then created a subsidiary of his investment firm called Quadrant Clinical Care, which paid Xthera another $10 million to become their distributor in the Caribbean. Now, notably, with this, Quadrant made a deal with a clinic on the island of Antigua where the government had given them the okay to use the Xthera filter on cancer patients, which is something that gave them a chance to rake in crazy amounts of money, with the Times citing a source saying that Quadrant paid Xthera $1,000 per filter and they needed 3 filters per treatment cycle. But this also as they were reportedly charging patients $45,000 per cycle. And when Xthera employees rolled up to this clinic in Antigua early last year, some of them got very concerned. With, for example, Xthera's former director of medical affairs, Dr. Jonathan Chow, reportedly seeing a lack of modern medical equipment, patients bleeding profusely and screaming in pain, and he even heard that patients were forgoing chemotherapy in favor of this treatment. And Dr. Chow reportedly voiced these concerns to the higher-ups at Xthera, saying that the company was taking undue risks with patients and subjecting them to human experimentation. He even reportedly called the Antigua clinic a dubious foreign operation and said that it amounted to an unethical and unsafe experiment on patients and urged Xthera to shut it down. But his pleas, they went unanswered, and Dr. Chow resigned from Xthera. And so with all this, you had the company bringing in patients, roughly 24 flying to Antigua for treatment, and among them was David Hudlow. You see, David, he was suffering from late-stage esophageal cancer when he and his wife Kim heard about Xthera and their blood filter. And so the Hudlows, along with Jamie Baskin, the wife of another man with metastasized cancer, got Preston on the phone to learn more about this treatment in Antigua. And on this call, Preston reportedly sang the filter's praises, bringing up the study in Croatia and saying that by taking out the tumor cells circulating in the blood, the immune system would be able to more effectively fight the tumor itself. And again, this, even though there is no published data to back that theory up. He also reportedly mentioned 3 patients who had previously gone through the Xthera treatment in Antigua, saying the improvement in how those patients felt was remarkable, with the meeting claiming that one woman was doing so well that she didn't need her pain meds anymore. And with that, it is worth noting here, as the Times does, that it is illegal to promote a drug or medical device in the US that hasn't been approved by the FDA, which some have said is exactly what Preston was doing here. But with that, Preston says that what he told the Hudlows and Jamie was, quote, true and accurate to the best of my knowledge and took place at the request of the treating physicians. That, even though reportedly there was no doctor involved in setting up this call. But, after that call with Preston, Kim Hudlow, being a former nurse, decided to dig a little deeper. So she spoke with Dr. Illick, as well as an oncologist that had previously consulted on her husband's care, who had been referring cases to Antigua. Though notably, he has since changed his stance, saying there isn't enough data to determine what's real or otherwise. But between both doctors' enthusiasm at the time and the phone call with Preston, the Hudlows had some hope, if not for saving David's life, then maybe for prolonging it. So they contacted the president of Quadrant Clinical Care to make the appointment, and they sent the company $45,000 with them then flying to Antigua. But then, once they got there, Kim reportedly saw several things that bothered her as a trained nurse. Saying the equipment wasn't being sterilized, a patient didn't have a machine monitoring their vitals, the nurses weren't washing their hands. But David, he went through 3 rounds of filtering only to feel weaker and in more pain afterwards. And once the Hudlows got back to Florida, they reportedly saw signs that David's cancer was growing aggressively. He had skin tumors growing on his back, neck, and head, and a test had shown that the amount of cellular tumor DNA in his blood rose by nearly 6 times over. Not to mention that he was struggling to breathe and he had to be taken to the ER where they found fluid buildup in the lining of his lungs. And so Kim, she was considering getting David back on chemotherapy, but Preston had warned against it on the call before, saying the chemo worked against the filtering process by weakening the immune system. And so she reportedly called Dr. Illick at Xthera again, who, according to the Times, told her not to worry about the cellular tumor DNA test results. With it being said that she added David feeling weak was a good thing, saying it showed he had, quote, strong immune activation. And Dr. Illick reportedly told Kim again about the Croatia study and even about a patient that had a similar case to David who saw his tumor shrink by 60%. She even reportedly said that British doctors had consulted her about the use of filtration for the treatment of Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, who she said had colon cancer. Though there, the Times reports that a source denied that. And so the Hudlows, they fly back to Antigua for another round of treatments. But David, he's in rough shape, and during the second round of filtration, his pulse reportedly jumped way up and he started gasping for breath. With him then reportedly transferred to the small ICU at the clinic where he got a blood transfusion and spent 3 nights on intermittent oxygen. And just 5 days after the Hudlows arrived, the doctor at the clinic told Kim that David was dying. And he recommended that they get on the same commercial flight that he would be on the next day, headed to Florida, saying if David was struggling to breathe on board, the doctor would declare a medical emergency and pull down the oxygen mask. But Kim reportedly dismissed that idea, instead trying to get an air ambulance from the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. But they couldn't accept an international transfer, and so she begged the clinic in Antigua to sell her a few oxygen tanks and then searched to find a charter jet that would fly them back to the States with the tanks on board. When they eventually landed in Jacksonville, Kim Kim reportedly rushed David to the Mayo Clinic, where they reportedly admitted him within 5 minutes of their arrival. With doctors draining more fluid from his lungs, and they found that the tumors in his liver, adrenal glands, bones, and soft tissue had multiplied and grown. There wasn't anything they could do, and David died days later. And looking back on it, you have Kim telling the Times that she believes that the filtration treatments accelerated his cancer's progression and made his end of life so much worse than it had to be. And notably, David Hudlow is just one example that the Times gave, saying that they identified at least 6 patients who died of the 20 plus who were treated in Antigua, with at least 2 other wives echoing Kim Hudlow's opinion that the filtration treatments supercharged their husband's cancers. So there, you have Quadrant's president saying the company, quote, has no reason to believe that the therapy had a negative impact on any patient's health, with them saying that many of the patients they've treated were terminally ill before coming to them, and adding that the perceptions of grieving family members, quote, are simply not reliable when compared to sound medical review and judgment of their care. Though with that, it is worth noting that after the Times sent them a big list of questions, Xthera told them that it had since split from Quadrant, though they reportedly didn't give any specific reason. And Quadrant is reportedly continuing to treat patients in Antigua with the Xthera filter and has several thousand in storage on the island. With us seeing Alan Quasha saying that the mutual decision to split ways, quote, had nothing to do with our belief in the efficacy of the filter treatment. And this is Xthera posted a statement in response to the New York Times piece calling it a misleading picture and saying that they refute the characterization of their company. Also noting that neither John Preston nor Dr. Illick work for the company anymore. But ultimately, for now, that's where we're at, and there's just a lot of unanswered questions here, so we're gonna have to keep an eye on it. And just maybe we'll get more information as more eyeballs turn to Xthera and Quadrant's clinic in Antigua, though for now, in the meantime, I'll just pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts here? And then I've got more news you need to know in just a moment. But back in the day, your dog eats better than you. It meant scoring some tasty table scraps. But these days, we know better. Treating dogs with table scraps, it's not doing any favors for our furry friends or ourselves. We all want a healthy pet, and diet is pretty much the one thing we can actually control. And there's a lot of different pet foods out there, but today's sponsor, Sundays, was created by an actual vet who got tired of the processed garbage most dogs were eating. And the genius part is it's air-dried like beef jerky, which means easy storage and zero fridge space needed. Or because they knew that pet parents, they want something convenient, but actually nutritious, because who has the time to become a full-time dog chef? As someone who's been there watching dogs slow down with age and changing metabolism, I'm telling you, it matters. We're talking real meat, organs, and superfoods, zero artificial junk. Honestly, home delivery dog food, it is a life hack you didn't know you needed. So y'all, upgrade your dog's diet. Head to sundaysfordogs.com/Phil and grab 50% off your first order. That's sundaysfordogs.com/Phil, and trust me, your dog will be doing a happy dance. But then, next up, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. So the good news is that for the first time ever, the United States reportedly transplanted more than 48,000 organs last year. For a country with over 100,000 people perpetually on the waiting list is laudable, though there's still a lot of room for improvement. But then also, the bad news is we're not totally sure all those organs went to the right people. And no, I'm not talking about a guy who was supposed to get a kidney, getting a heart, or some weird Frankenstein shit, but rather, we're looking at why, now more than ever, the people at the front of the line for an organ get skipped in favor of someone hundreds or even thousands of spots further back. We're in a practice which, if this New York Times investigation is correct, could completely undermine the trust and fairness at the heart of the entire organ transplant system. But, to really get a handle on this, we need to understand how the system is supposed to work and then how it actually works. So yeah, buckle up. So the first thing you need to know is that everything is managed by a network of nonprofit organ procurement organizations. There are 55 of them across the country, with at least one in every state, and they get government contracts to identify donors, procure those persons' organs, and match those organs with patients, with federal rules strictly mandating that they prioritize the patients who need organs most. But the way that they determine that is a little more fluid than you might assume, because there's actually no single waiting list, even for a particular type of organ. Instead, every time an individual organ becomes available, a new unique list is generated specifically for that. Because you got to take the whole registry, then cut off anyone with disqualifying medical or paperwork issues. Then you cut off anyone with incompatible blood types using an algorithm, and then you narrow down the patients with other matching traits such as height and weight. Then finally, you begin ranking them, prioritizing those who are sicker, have been waiting longer, and are nearby, among other factors. And then once you've got the list in hand, you're supposed to offer the organ to the doctor for the first patient on the list. Thing is that doctor doesn't have to accept the organ. But if they believe it may not be a good match because of the patient's age or the organ size or a whole host of other reasons, they can decline the offer. And so then you're supposed to go to the doctor for the second patient in line, and then the third, and then the fourth, and all the way down until you get someone who takes the organ. And traditionally, procurement organizations would follow this process pretty faithfully, only breaking from it as a last resort to avoid wasting an organ. Because with kidneys in particular, recipients aren't identified until after the organ is removed. move. The more time you spend calling up doctors and organizing transport, the longer the organ is sitting outside of the body, nearing its expiration date. So occasionally, organs would go to waste, and for a long time, that was just considered a price worth paying for a fair and just system. But then, in 2020, procurement organizations came under fire from Congress and regulators for wasting too many organs, with federal officials at the time moving to begin grading each organization and firing the worst performers. And so with a kick in the ass, these organizations assigned more staff to hospitals to identify donors, get more aggressive with families, and recovered more organs from older or sicker donors. But